his workshop.
We've been learning what being God's image means. In the big picture, it means that we are God's children, that we are his royal representatives, and that we are his priests.
That's right. Today, we'll look at how we live in God's image. If we could boil it down to one instruction to follow, what that would be?
In Mark chapter 12, Jesus was asked which commandment was the most important. This is an interesting question, especially in light of our discussion. If we're made in God's image, what is the most important commandment for living? Jesus answered, the most important commandment is this. Listen, O Israel, the Lord our God is the one and only Lord. And you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, and all your strength.
Jesus was actually quoting Deuteronomy. It reads, Listen, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. And you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. This passage is called the Shema because the first word is Shema. It means listen. Faithful Jews have prayed this passage 2 times a day for centuries. The earliest records of the practice date from the 2nd century BC. But likely they pray it even before them. Even in Jesus' day, Jews were praying this prayer twice a day. It was very familiar to his listeners when he quoted. But perhaps it surprised them that Jesus counted as the most important commandment. We are going to look at what this commandment teaches us about living in God's image.
Let's begin with the word Shema. It means more than listen. In Hebrew, to Shema means both to listen and to respond. Shema conveys this concept of listening that leads to doing. So in this passage, we're called to listen and obey what follows.
Before we're giving the commandment, we are reminded of who is giving it. It is coming from the one true God. In fact, the word translated as Lord in this verse shows God's sovereignty over us. So the following commandment comes from our one true sovereign King.
Wow, that certainly gives authority and weight.
That's for sure. Let's pause for a moment and think about what leaders today expect of us. They expect us to pay our taxes, to keep the laws of the land, perhaps to agree with them. What does our sovereign King call us to do? You must love the Lord your God. God's sovereignty, rule, and presence in our lives begin with love. No taxes, no laws, not even explicitly with agreement. God begins with love. Let that sink in for a moment. God's chosen starting point is love. Everything else flows from there.
To love someone, you need to know them. Since we are created in God's image, the best way to understand what that means is to get to know the one who put his image in us.
We cannot will our way to love. We learn our way to love. As we learn about him, we will love him.
Love is intrinsic to God's nature. He isn't just loving, he is love. This is a universal and everlasting fact. It's based on how God talks throughout the Bible, and we see that love is one of his most powerful emotions. But we also see that it isn't just a feeling, it's an action. His work of creation, covenants, deliverance, forgiveness, salvation, all stem from his love.
So to bring all this together, The commandment to love God is really a call to respond to the love God has shown us, to respond by love Him in return.
When God says the starting point is love, He means that it's a place of mutual, reciprocal love, beginning first with His love for us.
And that brings us to the natural next question. How do we love Him? Deuteronomy answers, with all your heart, all your soul, and all your strength. This is an all-compassing statement. It essentially says to love God with all we are and have. But we want to dig deeper than that.
Since Deuteronomy was written in ancient Hebrew, it would be helpful to get into the Hebrew mind, to understand what they understood by the words heart, soul, and mind. That will give us clues on how to love God.
The ancient Hebrews did not have a word for brain. So when they said heart or laugh, they meant something like combination of how we view our hearts and minds today. The heart kept a person alive, of course, but it was also where thinking, understanding, wisdom, discernment, and decisions happened.
The heart was also the source of emotions, desires, and willpower. And most importantly, it was where a person connected to God. In short, the heart was the center of a person's physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual life. This is why Solomon wrote, "Guard your heart above all else, for it determines the course of your life." To guard your heart meant to guard your entire self.
So we respond to God's love by learning to think like God thinks, to interpret reality and to make connections like God does. We respond to God's love by learning to focus on what He says is important.
We also respond to God's love by learning to align our willpower with His will, by learning to devote our energies to His purpose for us. We respond to God's love by learning to desire what He desires.
And we respond to His love by growing our relationship with Him and deepening our love for Him.
In short, we love God with all our hearts when we surrender our entire being to Him and His will. Let's talk about loving God with all our souls. Today, we're very influenced by the Greek idea of the soul. It's seen as something separate from our physical bodies that, when we die, continues living somewhere. But that is not how Hebrews saw the soul. The soul was indivisible from the physical body.
The Hebrew word for soul is nephesh. It literally means throat, but it also meant the whole body. In the Bible, a person is a nephesh, a whole, living physical being. To illustrate, here's what Hebrews call a murderer, a nephesh killer. A dead person is a dead nephesh. So, nephesh simply means the entire human body.
So, with that understanding, how do we love God with all our soul or with our nefesh?
Well, we dedicate our entire physical existence to our Creator King. We offer all of our time, talents, resources, whether financial, physical, mental, emotional, or spiritual, to God. We surrender to His will and follow Him.
Lastly, we come to loving God with all our strength. The Hebrew word here is mehad, which does not mean strength. A different word means strength. This is the only place where mehad is translated as strength. So, what does mehad mean, Douglas?
It's a very interesting word. We don't have an exact equivalent in English, which is why it is hard to translate here. Mehod means very or much. It is the word God used when He completed creation. He said it was mehod good. So Deuteronomy is telling us to love God with all we have got. We can see the difficult in translating the word here in this passage.
Essentially, we're told to love God at our fullest capacity, at our greatest excellence, to do our very best in all things for the glory of God, to honor God with literally everything we are and everything we have. Love God with all your heart, all your soul, and with all the excellence that you have. I hope this has given you a good foundation in understanding how God's love for you and your responsive, wholehearted love for Him help you live in His image.
Next time, we will look at how we love our neighbor. Until then, let's remember our key questions. What is God doing in my life? Do I have the courage to be a part of His work? Am I truly willing to join Him in His work of redemption in my life and all around me?